Hi, everybody. I'm David Ignatius, a columnist for the Washington Post. Welcome to the National Book Festival. In this difficult time of the pandemic, one thing we can do, and I know you're all loving it as I am, is to read good books. I wrote a book that was published this summer, The Paladin, which is about a CIA officer who's struggling with one of the central problems of our time, which is knowing what's true and what isn't. And it's my great pleasure to have with me today two people who wrote two of the very best books of this summer about issues related to our new technologically sophisticated world and the dangers. First, I want to introduce Barton Gellman, my former colleague at the Washington Post, who wrote an extraordinary memoir of his dealings with Edward Snowden that led to the revelations about NSA technology and surveillance, and as the subtitle of Bart's book says, the American surveillance state. And I also want to introduce another outstanding author, Thomas Rid, who teaches at Johns Hopkins, whose book Active Measures is a history of what we have come to call disinformation, the ways in which our election systems, our politics, our very political fabric can be manipulated by foreign governments, and the history of that kind of operation going back many decades. These are two extraordinary books. I'm delighted to have Bart and Tomas with me this morning. And I want to ask each of you if you'd begin with a brief 1-minute summary of what you'd most like readers at this National Book Festival to know about your books. And then we'll go on to a broader discussion. But Bart, lead us off.
Dark Mirror is an attempt really to combine three books. It is a story of Edward Snowden, who he is, how he did what he did, why he did what he did. And it takes you behind the scenes of our interaction, journalist and source. It is a story of the surveillance state and the content of the revelations that Snowden made about the NSA and the change of boundaries that it secretly put into effect after 9/11, so that there were lines that were crossed after 9/11 that the American people did not know about. And the third is a more personal memoir, which I did not expect to write, but it's the story of the investigation, the investigative reporting that went into this. It brings you into the newsroom, into Moscow hotel rooms, and into all the places where I was doing my own reporting and the dilemmas and risks and, in some cases, dangers that I faced.
I should say, just in closing that opening discussion of Dark Mirror, that there's a way, readers, that you'll find in Bart's book a modern, highly technical version of the sorts of dilemmas and dramas that we associate with all the president's men. The stakes are high, and Bart takes us inside the newsroom of the 21st century, not Ben Bradley's newsroom, but a different one. And I think that's one of the strongest parts of the book. Tomas, your book similarly is one that I had a chance to talk about with the public early in its publication. I think it's an extraordinary book, as I said in my review of the Washington Post. And I ask you just to describe a little bit of what you were trying to do in this broad look at the history of active measures of disinformation over time.
Yeah, I was in 2016 when the election interference here in the general election was getting started in mid-June that year, the public-facing side of it. I was investigating a Russian hacking campaign, an older one. So I was closely paying attention to Russian computer network operations at the time. And very quickly, it became clear that we're looking at a disinformation operation. Literally within one day, that was quite clear. And while I was able to understand most of the technical forensic evidence, it very quickly became clear I was not equipped to understand the history. I was not equipped to understand the dynamics of what it means when large intelligence organizations develop a focus on disinforming, on shaping narratives, on interfering in public and sometimes private conversations, either in a broad way or in a very targeted way. So that history was ultimately what allowed me to put into context what happened in 2016, and yeah, I've spent about 4 years writing that history.
And Tomas, I think everyone in this summer, we're now less than 100 days before the 2020 U.S. presidential election, would want to ask you, is this effort to manipulate our politics from abroad, and in particular by Russia, continuing in your judgment?
It appears to be continuing, but look at the 2020 election from the perspective of Russian military intelligence, or indeed another Russian intelligence, any other Russian intelligence actor, be it government or private sector. They actually have a real problem, because the expectation that a lot of people have is that they will be aggressive, that they will be effective, that they will again try to play this game of political warfare, as CIA called it in the 1950s. But so they're delivering against extraordinary expectations. And 2016 in many ways was the perfect storm for them. A highly polarized situation. We still have that, obviously. But also nobody expected election interference in 2016. Not everybody, but a lot of people are expecting it today, which to a degree, but only to a degree, creates a certain amount of immunity, or at least the defenses are up today. So yes, they're trying, but probably it's harder for them to succeed again.
Bart, I want to turn this question to you and ask you to assess the foreign threats to American citizens via computer technology versus the thing that you focused on in your reporting about Edward Snowden in your book, The American Surveillance State. Is there a way for you to assess the relative danger external from the kinds of people that Tomas is focused on in Moscow, and internal in the continued efforts by NSA to collect information around the world that may target Americans?
There are very different kinds of threats. The external threat landscape is broad. A lot of it has to do with straight up espionage, whether it's commercial or traditional American style defense and national security espionage. So you have many actors, some with criminal motivations and some with commercial and some with security, who are penetrating American computing devices with phishing attacks and other more sophisticated methods. And so they're breaking into defense contractors, they're breaking into university research, they're breaking into commercial processes, they're breaking into COVID research in order to gain some sort of advantage. And of course, there's a large number of hackers who are looking to steal personal information for identity theft and for financial theft. There are blackmailers who are coming after Americans who they think can pay, and they're using ransomware to lock up computers and threaten to destroy information if a ransom is not paid. The threat from the NSA is more of a shifting of boundaries between the government and its own people in a democracy. It's the fact that in the course of its surveillance of foreigners, the NSA has moved into the large digital commons. It is surveilling large swaths of the internet itself, and in so doing, it inevitably pulls in huge volumes of U.S. citizen traffic, and so we are being asked to tolerate a level of surveillance over Americans that we never had before.
But let me press you to address a question that you discuss some in your book. But to put it in the most direct way, do you worry that the revelation of all of the things that the NSA could do, all the capabilities, may have weakened the United States' ability to defend itself against very aggressive and increasingly sophisticated adversaries?
I think there's no doubt that some of the Snowden revelations must have reduced collection, must have interfered with NSA operations, and not least because of the opportunity cost, the time and personnel and money that was expended on mitigating against those risks. So if you have hundreds and hundreds of people in the intelligence community who are occupied full time with learning what risks there have been to collection and mitigating those and finding alternate paths to the same information, those people are not doing something else that they would normally have been doing. There are other ways in which Snowden's revelations could be argued to have led to collection losses, but I don't know that you could count that as damage under the way our system operates. That is to say, if the revelations led consumers to demand greater privacy because they didn't like having their own data intercepted, and so then internet companies like Google encrypted its connections from Google servers to your own servers, that can be said to have interfered with NSA collection. But that's the marketplace working the way it's supposed to. If citizens didn't like some of what they were learning and asked for legislative changes or brought legal challenges in court, that's the system working the way it's supposed to work. And so a lot of the things that the intelligence community regards as damaging about Snowden's leaks is actually the system responding appropriately and according to our own core principles about how we govern ourselves.
Yeah, if I may just quickly jump in here. I also had the privilege to review Barton's book in the Washington Post, and it's truly an impressive book, and in fact changed my opinion and views on what Edward Snowden did. So, which in some ways is the highest compliment you can get as an author. But if you read his book next to mine, there's really a question that leaps out from that comparative read, so to speak. And the question is, how can it be that the NSA has these really impressive signal intelligence capabilities that Barton is talking about, yet failed, and I say failed here in reference to the entire US intelligence community, really significantly, if not spectacularly, in 2016 in understanding an ongoing election interference before it happened and even in real time. Because let's remember that the people who were tracking it early on were private sector companies, CrowdStrike, Dell SecureWorks, and outside experts, not people in the intelligence community. At least they didn't mention any of their early findings publicly, and even in hindsight, I'm not convinced they actually had their eyes on the ball. So what happened there?
It is a great question. To some extent, I can speculate that this relates to you don't find something that you're not looking for. I mean, the NSA and the whole intelligence community are governed by an extensive and prioritized list of questions and topics that they're meant to be looking at. So it's proliferation of nuclear weapons, what exactly is happening with Iran on any of the following subject areas, and so on down the list. Were they tasked and did they think to look for outside interference in U.S. elections? There could be some doubt about that.
Bart, I think this might be a useful time to ask you to share with our viewers your sense of what Edward Snowden is like. This is an elusive personality for most of us, but he's somebody who really has shaped the world that we live in. You've had the unusual opportunity to talk with him, I'm guessing, as much as any other person except his wife. You've seen him in Moscow. Just describe for our National Book Festival viewers what he's like as a person, what troubled you, what you admired, what your takeaway was.
Well, he's a fascinating character. He is an autodidact. He is someone who follows his own rules. If he's not interested in something as a student, he doesn't pay any attention to it and gets terrible grades. He's tired of high school. So after spending most of a year away because of illness, he never returns and takes the GED instead, which he aces with flying colors. He teaches himself computer techniques because he enjoys the computer, and he signs up to take certification courses for a bunch of advanced certifications in the computer field, including certified ethical hacker. That's one of my favorites. In many cases, without even taking the course, he just takes the exam, and he's got a sort of preternatural ability to understand what the examiner is looking for and to answer the question. He takes a highly unusual route into the intelligence community, starting off as a nighttime security guard, and finding that his talent for computer work is accidentally discovered. He's encouraged to get a Microsoft certification and just to start applying for jobs in a community that doesn't care very much about educational attainment, but cares what you can do. He is someone who has a very strong and unbending sense of what's right and wrong. He is, in that sense, a zealot, as in my experience, many whistleblowers are. They see the same things that other people see. They judge them, and they say that if no one else is going to do something about this, then I am. He's capable of being funny. He will every now and then relax and shoot the breeze and talk about sort of off-topic things, but he's unusually focused and quite stubborn about what he will and won't say on the subjects that he's become best known for. So, I mean, we had a fraught relationship and a lot of tension at the margins about what he would and wouldn't tell me. And there was one significant moment in which I believed he had misled me. That led to another kind of confrontation.
If, Bart, we had a different administration come next year, a different attorney general, would you like to see Snowden allowed to come back and face trial here in America? People, I think, would demand that in the national security community. And what do you think the terms of that trial should be? Should he be allowed to make an argument that he really helped more than he hurt? How do you see that going?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's going to happen. It certainly won't happen voluntarily on his part. The charges he actually faces include espionage. And you can't sort of make up how you would like a trial to go. I mean, it would fit his own sense of justice. And I think I agree with him here. If he were able to mount a public interest defense, if he were able to try to persuade a jury that he had done more good than harm, that his intent had been to advance the interests of the United States and its own citizens. But the way the law is written right now, the elements of the crime are that he had lawful access to classified material and he gave it to someone who did not have lawful access. That's it. That's the whole crime. So he can't say, well, it turns out that I exposed some legally doubtful operations. Even if every single program he exposed had been found to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, he would still be guilty of espionage under the terms of the law. And so we're not going to get the kind of trial in which he is allowed to offer evidence of his intentions or his actual effects on security.
Turn to Tomas, and ask about the riddle that I found most haunting in your book, Active Measures. You go through a detailed and powerful description of all the things that Russia over decades has done to try to manipulate other countries. But as you talk about recent events, the way America was turned upside down during the 2016 elections and since, you talk about the way in which individual American citizens have been the carriers of this disinformation. We've been the mules, if you think of how a drug cartel works, who carry the poisonous material back and forth. If it wasn't for us, for our amplifying, spreading, disseminating these Russian tidbits, it wouldn't have had much effect. Is that an accurate way to describe where you end up in the book, and elaborate on that theme, that the underlying body politic is crucial in how disinformation works?
Disinformation is almost like a parasite. It lives off of an existing host body politic. And what I mean by that is that, for example, active measures would exacerbate existing tensions, existing frictions, existing contradictions in the old communist language that was emerged in the 1920s. Disinformation was designed to exacerbate something that was already existing. For example, a highly polarized situation in the 1970s, when in the context of the peace movement between those in favor of strong deterrence and nuclear weapons and those against nuclear weapons. Soviets and East Germany, for example, the Stasi very much tried to help the peace movement because it ultimately served their interests to criticize American force modernization plans. But that creates an intellectually really difficult problem. How do you react? I'm going to suggest something unusual. Look at this problem from the point of view of the operator running an operation, of say the KGB in the Cold War. If you're exacerbating an existing phenomenon, then how can you tell really whether you are the cause of a certain development or whether something was already happening without you? So I think what we're looking at today is this situation that they're trying to, especially now in 2020, that the Russian intelligence community continues to try to take advantage of existing debates and frictions in the United States. But if we fall into the trap of ascribing to their action too much power, for example, if you think or claim that the Russian election interference was responsible for getting Donald Trump elected, there's simply not enough evidence to support that claim. We cannot say for a fact that they had an actual impact on the outcome of the 2016 election. But if you make that call of judgment, if you say, I believe the Russian election interference is responsible for Donald Trump winning the election, at least partly, then you are ultimately helping them to achieve that goal. So in a nutshell, the risk is that the narrative about disinformation becomes part of disinformation. We really are in a constructivist nightmare here.
So let me ask each of you to think with all of us about what we can do about the threats that you described so well in your book, Dark Mirror and Active Measures. Because our title is Big Brother is Watching, I'm going to phrase it. What can we do to help the modern day Winston Smith, who was the hero of that book, resist, fight back, survive amidst all of these technological threats? Bart, let me start with you, and I'll name some of the people who might help Winston, and you can tell me if they will or won't. Obviously, technology companies conceivably could help protect us, but we're not sure whether that's a good idea or bad. Conceivably, government could help us protect its citizens, but again, terrible problems in that regard. What way do you see to get the citizen protect the United States separate and first. Better protection, better security. How's that going to happen?
Well, if you conceive of the problem as the U.S. government, the U.S. intelligence community having breached a line that it had previously been obliged to respect into surveillance of its own citizens, then you have a number of possible actors here. The technology companies have already and quite deliberately done a substantial amount to restrict that because just about every website you go to now is a secure website, that is, say, HTTPS, a little lock icon in your browser bar. That wasn't the case when Snowden made his revelations. The whole internet has made that change, led by a few companies like Google, whose motives were explicitly a desire to spend tens of millions of dollars, possibly an order of magnitude more than that, in order to thwart bulk collection by its own government, which is a remarkable thing. It hasn't happened before. The tech companies have largely been cooperators, and to some extent still are. And you could look at it cynically and say, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, that their core attitude toward this is no one gets to spy on our users but us, because there's a whole different set of problems having to do with the information economy and the surveillance economy in the private sector. You have other players. There are political processes here with NGOs and lobbying groups and political coalitions that are demanding more privacy and achieving it to some extent in legislative forums. There are litigators who are challenging some of the lawful basis for some NSA operations. But fundamentally, if citizens and consumers in the marketplace are asking for more privacy, there is some chance that they can get it.
Tomas, I want to ask you to talk about the future threats beyond the nightmares we've been discussing. In my new novel, The Paladin, I talk about the ways in which computers can now create video and sound imagery that is so perfectly woven together that you can create a fake David or a fake Donald or a fake Joe, and it's very difficult to know the difference between the fake and the real. So we're entering a new era in which we're going to have to begin to put quotation marks, I fear, around truth until we've done our checking. And I want to ask, as you as the historian of disinformation, if you will, what do you think about this new world of deep fakes and the ability to create not fake news, but fake events? How are we going to deal with that?
I think in some ways, the quality of forgeries that we've seen during the Cold War was much higher than anything that I've seen to date. Of course, they used often technology, almost always technology that was much more hands-on, but you can almost say that you can't say that forgeries in the Cold War were artisanal, whereas they are industrial today. At least that's how leaks would work. So the forgery, the quality of forgeries that I'm seeing today isn't there yet. So the future threat that you're describing is indeed in the future for now. What I'm more concerned about is almost the threat of deep denial as opposed to deep fakes. For example, imagine the Access Hollywood tape, where the candidate Donald Trump used foul language to describe women. The Access Hollywood tape came out today. He would be, he would simply deny its authenticity because it is credible and easy to forge and fake his voice, and so it's easier to simply dismiss actual evidence, forensic evidence, in a way that was just not possible before. So there's this unpleasant, dangerous flip side as well. But what can we do about this? I don't think it will become impossible to draw the line between facts and forgery. In fact, what I'm seeing is an entire discipline, an entire community of people emerging, and that includes intelligence officers, includes law enforcement, includes investigative journalists, includes scholars, open source intelligence researchers, who really obsess about the quality of forensic evidence of all kinds, through images, sound, digital forensics, artifacts. And there's an obsession really with fact and with the truth that, of course, runs completely counter to the prevalence of lying that we see and disinformation today. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we will be in a position to that community that is emerging of people who have the mindset of investigative journalists, so to speak, will be able to teach others to really enjoy that moment when you find a new piece of evidence that leads you to revisit your existing assumptions. In a way, that's one of the greatest things of a scholar and of an investigative journalist. And I'm optimistic ultimately.
Could I just mention, David, that in your own book, in Paladin, you've come up with a near future scenario, and I don't want to spoil it here, in which a deep fake is sophisticated enough to fool a lot of people in the short term, and that it actually doesn't matter to the purposes of the fakers whether forensic evidence comes along shortly thereafter that says, well, maybe this thing isn't really true. That they've achieved their goal simply by causing people to believe it or believe it might be possible, even for just a few minutes. That's a problem that isn't solved by forensics.
I was thinking about that problem, Barton, in the Paladin, and I put to you the conclusion that I've come to, and you tell me if I'm being naive here. In this world where it's so easy to manipulate, to create false information that appears to be real, the value of the truth, no quotation marks, the truth, reliable action, information that you can trade upon in securities markets, that you can use to vote as a citizen in our political case, the value of that truth will become much greater. And people will pay more for it because it's so important to them. So, that gives me hope that the market for what we do as journalists, as analysts, is going to be greater, because people are going to die if they keep drinking from a poisoned information stream. The second question, this is one where I'd like to ask Bart and then Tomas to answer. We wonder whether technology companies, social media companies like Google and Facebook, should be more responsible, be more liable for the truth or falsity of what they put on their sites. So there's an argument that Facebook should be like the Washington Post. If Bart or I write an article and somebody says that's not true, our paper can get sued because they published it. Should that case apply as well to a social media company like Facebook, which is going to have to be liable for what it posts on its platform? Bart, what do you think?
Well, that's a really interesting question. There are two issues there, among probably many others, that come to mind for me. One is that these internet companies have vigorously resisted that role for legal and regulatory reasons. If they are a public utility, if they are essentially a neutral conveyor of information, the same as the phone company, you don't hold the phone company liable for the fact that people make telephone calls and lie, or say untrue things, or make damaging forms of speech. So that's the place they want to be for legal and regulatory reasons. If you ask them to be, as Facebook says, it does not want to be an arbiter of truth, you have to try to imagine how that could be done at scale with well over 1 billion users. And God knows how many posts each day. How could they possibly be the arbiter of truth for all that many things? And yet they are deliberately promoting content in order to keep our attention. Anything they can do to keep us for 10 seconds longer on a page is valuable to them for their advertising business. And their algorithms take the most extreme content that gets the biggest rise out of people and promotes that and sells ads against it. And so you do want them to be much more responsible with the way they use that. The same thing with YouTube. You clicking about a subject, and next thing you know, you're watching videos that are more and more insightful, more and more extreme, and then you're locked into a pattern in which there's an interactive process of radicalization. So,
Tomas, I'm going to ask you to wrap up this terrific discussion by taking your role as a historian of disinformation and pull your camera back. Think 20 years from now, how we're going to look back on this period we've been living through, the enormous uproar over Russian disinformation efforts in the 2016 election and everything surrounding it. Will we look back and see this as the beginning of a problem that got worse that we never found a way to deal with? Or will we, over time, get more sophisticated, subtle, I want to say cynical, and not be as disrupted by these external efforts? What's your sense?
Of course, especially for anybody doing historical work, you're very cautious about predicting the future, because we tend to get it wrong. That's a historical statement. The situation right now, though, the two overarching threats and problems that I am really concerned about now are unrelated to Russian election interference. The first one is the current administration, the president himself, laying the groundwork for calling the legitimacy of the 2020 election into question immediately afterwards. He's doing that in a systematic fashion, and he's not alone in preparing that ground. Combine that with a potential second wave of COVID-19 hitting us exactly during that time frame in October and November when the election is going to happen, which in some way will or could support the argument that the election was not legitimate because it was so risky to go out and vote in November. Difficult to say. So that, I think, is a pretty scary combination of trends. In the COVID situation, however, if I zoom out and try to be optimistic, I'm an immigrant, so I overcompensate on the optimism side sometimes. But COVID in some ways is accelerating a positive development also, and that is, look at Twitter and the way Twitter has handled misinformation on COVID, even coming from the president's son and the president himself. They took action because now it's not just an ideological argument whether speech should be somehow curtailed. Now it's a question of life and death. Misinformation has become lethal. And if you don't believe in, if you think COVID is a hoax, you have a family gathering and a couple of days later or weeks later, your mother-in-law dies, that is likely going to change your perspective in a way that an ideological conversation on social media never would achieve. And we see stories like that coming out now. So COVID, in a way, David, is teasing out the observation that you just made yourself, namely that the value of factually correct information based on clinical trials, based on reliable research and science, is increasing in the face of misinformation and, of course, in the face of such extraordinary costs of getting information wrong.
Well, on that affirmation of the primacy of fact, I think it's a good time for us to conclude this conversation. I want to thank our two superb authors. Barton Gellman, whose book Dark Mirror is a unique exploration of Edward Snowden, what his case meant, what the future of surveillance in America is, and Tomas Rid, whose book Active Measures is the best history of disinformation, of this effort to alter the basics of what we see and think in politics that I've ever read. I'm David Ignatius, author of a novel called The Paladin, which looks at some of these themes from a fictional standpoint. We want to thank the National Book Festival. The theme this year is American Ingenuity. I think we got a pretty good dose of the techno version of that as our two authors helped us walk our way through some of the biggest issues of 2020. So thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll hope to continue with you at the festival.